Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight on Utahns living in vehicles. This is a diverse population made up of adults and children coming from all types of backgrounds. The reasons that led them to this living situation are varied, and the challenges they face are unique. Tonight, we want to learn more about this community and what's being done to help improve their quality of life. Joining our conversation tonight are Wendy Garvin, Executive Director of Unsheltered Utah, and Nathan Kazarian, Vice President of Unsheltered Utah. Now, Wendy, thank you so much for coming back to the show. And Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's good to have the both of you here tonight. Now, Nathan, the last time that we had Wendy on the show, we got to hear about her backstory and what led to her work with Unsheltered Utah now. We want to hear about your backstory. Can you tell us about the events that led you to the work that you do with Unsheltered Utah now?
Yes, well, I think with advocacy, it's very important to stay in your own lane because that's where you're going to find your passion. And this was a personal issue to me. So in 2017, my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And we were renting a 6-bedroom home in Clearfield. And within 4 months, we found ourselves losing everything, our business. And I happen to run Utah's biggest meme page, Utah Satire.
Oh, that's
on Facebook.
you?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
So
now I'm getting to put a face to the name.
So I had these rescue kitties that I've, just been moving around with for years, and some lady that followed my meme page donated a 26-foot travel trailer, and my wife and I, we lived in it for a while, had it on the side of our in-laws' house, and we kind of were in and out of the trailer, but it was definitely a humbling experience, and it taught me gratitude for simple things in life, like when you turn on a tap at your house and warm water comes out and you can take a shower. That's amazing, and I had so much more gratitude for those little tiny things like that. So as I progressed with being a caregiver for my late wife, she became one of the big Proposition 2 stories, and we joined a lawsuit, Rocky Anderson's lawsuit, against the state of Utah and Governor Herbert and the Utah Department of Health, after Prop 2 was kind of gutted by the Utah State Legislature. So I kind of want to glaze over all of this stuff, but after that, I kind of dove into the healthcare space. I got passionate about Prop 2, Prop 3, and Prop 4. And then I connected with Shireen Gorabani, and I spoke on her panel for Medicaid expansion and all these complex issues that made my wife and I homeless. I kind of felt like diving into this space, I would definitely be in my own lane. And I saw Wendy and some other friends doing outreach in Salt Lake, and I decided, you know what? It's cold. I've got culinary skills. I'm gonna make chili. I ended up down at Camp Last Hope, and then I did find love again, and this was kind of a bonding experience for my fiance and I, and she went on outreach with us, and it was heavy, and it got heavier and heavier because we're out there in the winter months. I used my meme page to raise awareness. I live streamed abatements. I would reach over 50,000 people on my lives. I felt like I could bring awareness to this issue and also raise money for sleeping bags. So we were able to get hundreds of sleeping bags out over the course of the winter months.
Nathan, thank you so much for sharing that to you. I know that you've been through a lot in the past few years, and it's tough to share that vulnerable part of your life, especially on live TV, but it just shows that this topic can impact anybody of all sorts of backgrounds, and that's one of the reasons why we're here tonight. I want to talk about the diverse and the variety of the types of living situations that people who are unsheltered can go through. We've got tents, we've got cars, we've got people coming and going maybe through shelters. Wendy, maybe you can talk about what are some of the vast differences of living situations that someone who is unsheltered could be going through.
We see a lot of folks who they may lose a rental situation, and they'll move into their car or they'll move into an RV and they think it's temporary. And it might be. It often is temporary to stay in an RV for a few weeks or a few months. But we see a series of events that's all too frequent that leads people from a temporary RV stay to living all the way out in a tent on the side of the road. We've seen some really tragic stories where folks have been living in tents, purchased an RV, their RV had the engine and transmission stolen out of it in the middle of the night, and then the city came along and said, you can't leave your RV here. Well, of course they couldn't move it. So we were doing crazy things like using my Dodge Durango to pull a 32-foot RV around the city, trying to obey these code enforcement rules. And ultimately we lost that battle, and the young lady who was living in that RV met the code enforcement officers on a day that we weren't there to back her up. They towed it, it was destroyed, and she's back living in a tent on the street again. And we see this cycle play out over and over again, and almost always it is from rules and laws that are almost trivial compared to the impact they have on people's lives. So you must register your car every year. If it's not registered, they can tow it, they can impound it, and they can keep it forever, even if it's a $150,000 RV and it's your only place to live. So when we see people who are in an RV and they just get one code enforcement ticket and they're like, oh, it's no big deal, that code enforcement officer with no body cam, with very little oversight and very few rules surrounding the operation can take those homes away from people and put them from a temporary living situation back into tents, back on the street, and drastically more impacted by whatever financial circumstances brought them to that place in the first place. So it's, I struggle with the triviality of laws that just require you to keep a vehicle registered, and if it's not, you could take somebody's entire home. That's a cycle we see all too often.
Now, a lot to dive into here. Nathan and Wendy, hold that thought. We have to take a quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll resume our In Focus discussion on Utahns living in vehicles. Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on Utahns living in vehicles. We're continuing our conversation tonight with Wendy Garvin and Nathan Kazarian, both from Unsheltered, Utah. Thank you both for being here and staying with us. Nathan, let's start with you in this conversation. I want to know, how do you find these individuals who are living in their cars, or how do they find you? Is there a community of them?
Yeah, sometimes we just drive around down by shelters. We drive around town. Like I drove around Ogden for hours, and we just kind of find people. We've found a lot of people down by shelters. Sometimes just parking lots. Like Walmart will let people get away with camping in there for a while because I guess they figure they're gonna go in and spend money in the store. But yeah, we kind of just seek people out. But we've also had a lot of people reach out to us on our Facebook group, on the Unsheltered Utah group. And we've been able to assist them. Wendy's kind of been doing a lot of the boots on the ground stuff for over a year now. So she's definitely more of an expert at finding people than I am, but I'm getting the hang of it.
Thank goodness for social media these days.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize like that unsheltered people utilize social media just as much as we do to connect with resource and community as well.
And they do find us, and then they tell, if we're an effective outreach group, they tell their friends, and they hand out our phone numbers, and so our information about us spreads from camp to camp to camp. And anybody that they get help from that they like, they will pass that information on. So
good word, and that's a good recommendation and a good reflection on you all as an organization. Wendy, let's talk about registration of vehicles. Does your organization help with that?
We have not currently been able to help people pay registration on vehicles, partially because a lot of times there's mechanical issues. There's maybe they're not registered because they don't pass a particular inspection, and while we might be able to pay the registration fee, we can't pay for the repairs. So as a small nonprofit, we still don't have the sort of funding that we might need for that. What I am trying to do is reach out to legislators. I think a year ago in Utah, we we stopped impounding vehicles if somebody had a suspended driver's license. And I think we should stop impounding vehicles if they just are failing a registration, even if we're only giving like a 1-year moratorium or maybe a financial boost. You know, you can't register your vehicle, we will help you with this one time, you get a one-time shot. But I want the legislature to address this, because the punishment of taking a $150,000, $200,000 RV away from somebody that they are living in is so drastically non-proportional to the crime of failing to pay a low cost of registration. So I feel like we need to address that at its root, which is in the legislature. So that's state law, and that'll take some time.
Thank you for sharing that. Nathan, I'm wondering, where do these individuals park their cars? And you were in this situation once. You had family where you could park at, but maybe for someone else who doesn't have family here, or someone who's willing to lend their space to these people, where do they park? Are there designated areas?
They can go to KOAs, but I was kind of with my fiance tonight, and we were researching that. She's also a member of our board, and we found that some of these KOAs are up to $80 a night, and they're kind of full right now. So, and just even for a tent you're looking at $25 a night. What we see a lot is people moving around, getting pushed from one place to another, just similar to the abatements that the Salt Lake Police and the County Health Department are doing. And they're just being pushed from one block to the next. So
So
some
it sounds
people,
like there isn't a designated area for them.
Usually, so the lady with the laundry, remember that? Mm-hmm. So she was up in Sunset. My fiance and I helped this lady do laundry, and she was staying on this little chunk of property behind somebody's house. And we're like, can we get you food? Can we get you a brand new sleeping bag? Just anything to keep you warm. She's like, no, I have all I need. I just need to be able to do laundry so I can go to job interviews, because all my clothes are dirty. So there are people out there that are trying, but it's usually the people that are fortunate enough to find a little chunk of property where they're allowed to stay on. Sometimes business owners will be like, hey, you can park your RV here, just keep an eye on my business. I've seen arrangements like that in the past too. So,
but it's all kind of fluid. There's no like set place or anything. Wendy, we have about a minute left. I want to slide this question in before we go to break. Are people who living in their vehicles counted as part of the unsheltered population? Do we have any numbers or data on how many people are currently living in their cars right now?
I went out looking for answers to those questions today, because our point in time count that we do early every year to count our homeless population, the volunteers go out to known camps, they go along rivers, they do a walking search. But the RV camping is a pretty new issue. Really in the last year or so, we've seen it go from a few RVs or a few cars up to hundreds and hundreds of them. And so we don't have a way to count them yet. And I think only a few are probably counted in our point in time count. I think that we probably have a much greater number out there than we ever planned on or have the resources to address.
And that's so hard to address this issue when you don't have the hard data to understand the scope of the need for this. All right, Nathan and Wendy, hold that thought. We have to take another quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll resume our In Focus discussion on Utahns living in vehicles. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on Utahns living in vehicles. Before the break, we were joined by Wendy Garvin, Executive Director of Unsheltered Utah, and Nathan Kazarian, Vice President of Unsheltered Utah. This time we will start with you, Wendy. Mayor Mendenhall announced last week that the city would not be impounding any vehicles that were occupied. How do you think that's going to go?
Well, first off, I have to say I appreciate that Mayor Mendenhall continues to put time and effort towards these issues, but I have to say that I don't think this is going to work. A couple of months ago, she announced that the city would not be enforcing the no tent camping rules. And then we continued to see police officers enforcing those rules, putting up signs, arresting people, passing out tickets. And so I talked to a high-ranking member of the police force, and they said, well, as long as the law's on the books, we can enforce whatever we want. The mayor isn't our boss. which was a pretty challenging statement. And so I'm worried that they're going to continue to enforce the impound rules, even though Mayor Mendenhall is making this effort to try and change this. I think we have to change the law.
That's a difficult scenario for sure. Nathan, one topic that we've heard over and over again is the explosion of our housing market here in Utah, specifically Salt Lake County. It's getting ridiculously expensive to rent or buy. How does that play into the unique challenges that our unsheltered or people living in vehicles are facing?
I think it's greatly amplified it. Yeah, I've heard of people being evicted, like landlords just finding a reason to kick people out so they can move in another tenant and bump their rent up. So that right now it's like virtually impossible for most Americans to buy a house in Utah.
Right.
Unless they're selling a house in a different state and making an astronomical profit off of it and coming here, and there's bidding wars. So last I heard there was 1,100 houses on the market.
Which is not a lot.
Yeah, so we're finding more and more people on the street, and there was a lot of people that lost their businesses during COVID, and it's just...
It's the perfect storm.
Yeah.
Is what it is. Yeah. Wendy, we've run a few stories about homeowners living in residential areas that have complained about people living in their vehicles and trying to get them to move out of their neighborhood. It's always, not in my backyard type of thing. How do we reduce this tension between homeowners living in residential areas and people living in their vehicles who may be parking in their neighborhood?
Well, some of the answer is to address the logistical challenges of living homeless. Some of those are simple, like providing trash receptacles, because I don't know about you, but I can't live a few days without producing a lot of trash, cans and bottles, and so we need to give these folks an opportunity to throw their trash away legally. Right now, all dumpsters are restricted. So giving some logistical support to those living in vehicles would be the first step. The second is, just like anywhere else, if you have somebody move in next door to you, you take a bottle of wine, or this is Utah, will you take a can of Coke over to your next door neighbor?
Diet Coke. Diet Coke.
Beat me to it.
And you knock on their door and you say, "Hi, I'm your new neighbor. It's so nice to meet you." You want to have a good relationship with that new neighbor, right? Well, if you have somebody move in a vehicle in your neighborhood, take them a Diet Coke or a bottle of wine or whatever you do, and meet your new neighbor. And if they have trash piling up or some other logistical challenge, offer them that extra space in your trash can or whatever you might be able to do to be a good neighbor, because I promise they were a good neighbor the last place they lived. This is just a new rough situation that they're in. And so if we treat them like neighbors and we treat them like people, it goes better every time.
Time is flying with you two. We have 2 minutes left. I really want to get to our final question, which is what needs to be done? And this is a loaded question, right? And I want both of you to chime in, whoever wants to go on this one. But what do we need to do? What do we need to think about on a societal, communal, social level as far as what are ways that we can present better opportunities to this population?
I think that the very first thing we have to address is that living prices are astronomically high and wages are comparatively at an all-time low. So those are the large-scale problems that you and I maybe can't fix, but somebody somewhere can fix some of those things. The second piece, to me, is that we need to address some of these laws that we've been talking about that impound vehicles, that evict people for no reason and allow landlords to up the rent. If we have to cap prices to stop rent from skyrocketing for a temporary amount of time, that might be an answer, but we need to address the disparity of income and living expenses. I think that's our biggest issue.
Nathan, you've got 30 seconds. Anything you want to say?
I'm thinking like sanctioned camping and even maybe some sanctioned RV pads, because Salt Lake City, well, the Utah taxpayers are spending an astronomical amount of money on police abatements. I think you've pulled up some of the data, but it's very expensive for the county health department, assisted by the Salt Lake police, to come in and just bust these camps up, and then they come back and do it again. And then we have to go in and keep people alive, like resupply sleeping bags and water and clothing and all of these things. So I think the solution is the appropriation of funds and where that money is being put. Like, sanctioned camping, that's probably the best thing I can think of, and maybe some sanctioned RV pads, maybe KOA vouchers, even though it's kind of hard to get into a KOA right now. But that, I think that's the ultimate solution. I mean, the tiny home thing's amazing, and we want to work on that too. We want to work on all of these things. But right now,
unfortunately, I have to cut you off.
Okay.
We are out of time. But I have loved hearing from you too. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation with us. Nathan Kazarian, Wendy Garvin of Unsheltered Utah, you are both so near and dear to us. Thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
Thanks
Thank you for
us.
having us.
We'll be right back.